Let me start somewhere very simple. In Gospel of John, chapter 15, Jesus doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't give a long teaching. He just gives an image. I am the vine, you are the branches. I've sat with that passage for many years now, long enough to realize most of us don't misunderstand it loudly. We misunderstand it quietly. We nod when we hear it. We agree with it, but we go on living as if it weren't true. I remember once, many years ago, I visited a small garden behind an old house. The owner had passed away, and no one had tended it for a while. There was a vine there, still wrapped around the wooden frame, still in place, still looking almost right. But when I touched one of the branches, it snapped far too easily. It was still there, still attached in appearance, but there was no life in it anymore. And I stood there longer than I expected to, because something about it felt familiar. You see, I've met people, and I say this gently, who are still in all the right places, still praying, still listening, still trying to walk carefully. But something inside has grown very quiet. Not sinful in an obvious way, not rebellious, just not alive the way it once was. And here is where Jesus' words begin to feel less like poetry and more like truth we don't know what to do with. Apart from me, you can do nothing, not less, not a little weaker, nothing. Now when you're younger, you hear that and you argue with it a little. You think, surely I can do something. But when you've walked with God long enough, you begin to see what he meant. Because you can spend years trying to produce patience, trying to manufacture peace, trying to hold together a life that looks like faith, and still feel like something isn't truly growing. And at some point, if you're honest, you begin to wonder, am I trying to live something that doesn't actually come from me? Part 1, the subtle shift. When life becomes something you manage, there is a shift that happens so quietly, most people never notice when it begins. In the beginning, when you first come to God, everything feels like receiving. You don't know much, you don't control much, but there is a kind of life that meets you. You read a few words of scripture and they stay with you. You pray, and even if the words are simple, something feels heard. You don't feel like you're building anything. You feel like something is being given. But over time, something changes. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just slowly enough that you adjust to it. You begin to watch yourself more closely. You measure your reactions. You try to stay consistent. You start managing things, managing your behavior. Work so you don't say the wrong thing. Managing your thoughts so they don't go too far. Managing your spiritual life so it doesn't slip. And none of that is wrong in itself. But somewhere along the way, what once felt like a relationship begins to feel like something you are responsible to maintain. You don't say it that way, but you feel it. If you don't hold it together, it might fall apart. If you don't keep it going, it might fade. And without realizing it, you have stepped into a different kind of life. Not one that flows, but one that must be sustained. That's why those words from Epistle to the Galatians land so sharply, if you let them. Having begun by the Spirit, are you now being perfected by the flesh? It's not a harsh question. It's an honest one. How did this begin? Was it something you created, or something you received? And if it was received, how did it become something you now feel you must produce? Because that is the shift, not away from God, but away from the way life actually comes. Something that began as life has quietly become effort. Part 2, a branch that forgot it was a branch. Let me show it to you another way, not as an idea, but as something you can almost feel. I once saw a branch that had already been cut, but you wouldn't know it at first glance. It was still hanging there, caught between other branches, still in the right place, still looked alive enough. The leaves hadn't fallen yet. The shape was still there. But when I touched it, there was no resistance, no life pushing back, just dry. And that's the kind of thing you don't notice from a distance. You have to come close, because a branch can look connected long after the life has stopped flowing. Jesus said in Gospel of John 15, "Abide in me and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself, unless it abides in the vine." He didn't say the branch becomes weak. He didn't say it struggles more. He said, it cannot. Not because it's lazy, not because it refuses, because that's not where life comes from. And I think this is where many sincere people get lost, very quietly, not by turning away from God, but by slowly becoming something else, like a branch that is still in the right place, still doing what branches are supposed to do, but the life inside is no longer being received. So it tries. It holds its form. It keeps its position. It does everything it can to remain what it once was. But fruit doesn't come from memory. It doesn't come from effort. It only comes from life. And the branch was never meant to produce that life, only to stay where it flows. But if you forget that, you don't immediately fall. You just begin to live without the thing that was sustaining you, quietly, slowly, until one day you realize you've been trying to grow something that hasn't been coming into you for a long time. Part 3. The lie beneath the effort. If you sit with this long enough, you begin to see that the problem isn't on the surface. It isn't that you're not trying hard enough, and it isn't that you're careless. If anything, it's often the opposite. The people who feel this the most are usually the ones who have tried the longest. So the question becomes quieter but deeper. What is underneath all this effort? Not your schedule, not your habits, something beneath that. A belief you don't say out loud, but you live as if it were true. If I try hard enough, I can become what I'm supposed to be. It sounds reasonable, even responsible, and over time it becomes the way you approach everything, your thoughts, your reactions, your walk with God. You see something lacking, and your instinct is to work on it. Be more patient, be more steady, be more faithful. And little by little, without realizing it, you begin to treat life itself as something that can be built from within you. But that assumption is older than you think. If you go back to the beginning, to Book of Genesis, the first temptation was not simply about disobedience. It was about becoming something apart from God. You will be like God, the serpent said, not by receiving from him, but by taking, by acting, by stepping outside of dependence. And something in the human heart has carried that echo ever since. Not always in open rebellion, more often in quiet independence. The sense that if we just apply ourselves, just discipline ourselves, just stay consistent enough, we can produce the kind of life God is asking for. And that's why this becomes so hard to see. Because it doesn't feel wrong, it feels sincere. But sincerity cannot replace source. You can spend years trying to produce peace, trying to hold on to joy, trying to become loving in every situation, and still feel like you're reaching for something that never quite settles inside you, not because you don't care, but because you're trying to produce what was never meant to originate from you. And that is the lie beneath the effort. Not that you shouldn't care, not that you shouldn't walk carefully, but that life, real, spiritual life, can be generated from your own strength if you just push far enough. And Jesus, very gently but very clearly, says something that cuts through all of that. It doesn't come from you, not at the beginning, not along the way, not at the end. What you're trying to produce was always meant to be given. Part 4. When Jesus says something we don't want to hear, there are words of Jesus that comfort you, and there are words that quietly take away everything you thought you could rely on. This is one of them. In Gospel of John 15:5, he says, "Apart from me, you can do nothing, not less, not a little weaker, nothing." And if you let that sentence land the way it was spoken, it doesn't feel soft at first. It feels like something in you resists it. Because everything in us has been trained to believe the opposite. That if we try hard enough, if we stay disciplined enough, if we don't give up, then surely something will come from it. But Jesus doesn't leave room for that idea. He doesn't say you will struggle without him. He says there is nothing there to begin with. And I think, if we're honest, this is where the tension really begins. Not because we don't understand the words, but because we don't want them to be fully true. We're not as uncomfortable with sin as we are with dependence. Sin feels like something we can fight, something we can correct, something we can work on. But dependence means you have to stop standing on yourself entirely. It means admitting that the very thing you've been trying to produce, patience, peace, steadiness, love, doesn't originate from you at all. And that is harder to accept than most people realize. So what do we do instead? We keep trying. We adjust. we refine. We become more careful, more intentional, more serious about getting it right. And it looks good. It even feels responsible. But underneath it, there is still the same assumption that if we just go far enough, we will arrive. And Jesus, without raising his voice, quietly removes that ground from under our feet. Because as long as you believe life can come from you, even a little, you will keep returning to effort as your source. You will keep trying to carry something that was never placed in your hands. And this is the part that begins to change everything if you let it. Because the problem is not that you haven't tried enough, it's that you've been trying to produce what only comes from remaining. And until that shifts, the effort never really ends. Part 5. The hidden meaning of abide. If we stopped here with "you can do nothing," it would feel almost crushing. Because if life doesn't come from you, then where does it come from? And how does it actually happen? Jesus answers that with one word he keeps repeating in Gospel of John 15. Not a complicated word, not a heavy one, just this: abide in me, abide in my love. And I think this is where many people quietly get lost. Because we hear that word, and without meaning to, we turn it into something to do, something to maintain, something to keep up. But abide is not effort. It is not intensity. It is not a constant stream of activity trying to stay close to God. It is something much simpler, and if we're honest, much harder for us to accept. It is staying. It is remaining. It is receiving. A branch does not pull life in. It does not reach for it, or generate it, or concentrate hard enough until something begins to happen. Life flows into it because it is connected, that's all. And as long as that connection remains, life continues without strain, without noise, without the branch trying to prove anything. Jesus says, "Abide in my love. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you." That means the life he is speaking about doesn't begin with your consistency. It begins with his love. And it continues the same way it began, not by you holding on tightly, but by you not stepping away from what is already holding you. This is the shift most people never fully make. They believe discipline will sustain them. They believe if they can just be steady enough, focused enough, committed enough, they can keep this life going. But discipline by itself can only shape the outside. It cannot create the flow of life within. It cannot produce what only comes from being joined to something living. The Christian life is not sustained by how well you manage it. It is sustained by a relationship that continues, quietly, constantly, sometimes almost unnoticed. And the moment you begin to see that, even a little something inside you starts to loosen. Because maybe you were never meant to carry this. Maybe you were only meant to stay. Part 6. Why we keep trying instead of staying. There are people who cannot sit in silence, not even for a few minutes. Not because they are restless by nature, not because they don't care about God, but because the moment everything becomes quiet, something else begins to surface. So they keep something playing. A voice, a song, a message, or if not that, then movement, doing something, fixing something, moving forward in some way. And from the outside it doesn't look wrong. It looks like a life that is active, even devoted. But if you come a little closer, you begin to see what's underneath it. Because staying real, staying is different. It means you are no longer filling the space. You are no longer holding the moment together. You are not trying to move anything forward, but you are just there. And for many people, that is where it becomes difficult. Not because staying is complicated, but because it removes something we've learned to depend on. Control. Doing gives you a sense that something is happening, that you are making progress, that you are keeping things alive. But staying doesn't feel like that. Staying feels like waiting, like not knowing, like having nothing to point to and say this is working. And if you sit in that long enough, you may begin to notice something you didn't expect. A kind of emptiness. Not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet realization that there isn't much flowing underneath. And that is the moment most people move away from. Not because they don't love God, but because they don't know what to do with that kind of stillness. So they return to what feels familiar. They do more. They try again. They keep things moving, because doing feels safer than depending. It lets you stay in control, even if nothing is truly growing. But a branch does not struggle to remain. It only struggles when something has already been lost. And sometimes, if we're honest, the reason we keep doing so much is because stopping would reveal more than we're ready to face. Part 7. When God allows the emptiness, there is a moment, and not everyone stays long enough to recognize it, when all the trying begins to lose its effect. The same prayers you've prayed before now feel thin. The same effort you once relied on no longer carries you. And for a while, you don't know what to call it. You might think something is wrong, that you've drifted, that you've lost something. But what if this is not loss? What if this is exposure? In Gospel of John 15, Jesus says that the Father prunes the branch that bears fruit, not because it's dead, but because it is alive. And that's the part we rarely understand. We expect God to remove what is obviously wrong, but sometimes he begins with what looks right, because it's the very thing you've started to depend on. There are seasons when God allows your strength to fail, not to shame you, but to show you where you've been drawing from, where effort has quietly replaced connection, where doing has taken the place of remaining. You see it in the life of Simon Peter. He was sincere, loyal. He meant every word when he said he would never fall away. And yet in one night, everything he trusted about himself gave way, not because Jesus was finished with him, but because Peter needed to see something he could not see while he was still strong in himself. And I think this is where many people turn back, because this kind of emptiness feels like failure. It feels like something has been taken away, like something that once worked no longer does. But if you stay just a little longer, without rushing to fix it, without filling the space, you begin to see something else. The emptiness is not there to leave you empty. It is there to make room. To clear out what you've been leaning on so you can begin to recognize what has always been there waiting, not something you produce, but something you receive. God does not prune to reduce life. He prunes to remove everything that is not coming from him. And sometimes what feels like the loss of everything that worked is the beginning of finally living from what is real. Part 8. What life looks like when it actually flows. It doesn't arrive the way you expect. There isn't a moment where everything suddenly changes. No clear line where you can say, this is when it began. It's quieter than that, almost like something has been happening for a while, and you're only now starting to notice. You find yourself in a situation that would have unsettled you before, and somehow you don't react the same way. Not because you held yourself back, not because you reminded yourself to be patient. You just are. There is a kind of steadiness that wasn't there before, a patience that didn't have to be managed, a gentleness that didn't feel calculated. And if you're paying attention, you realize something that is both simple and unsettling. You didn't produce this. You didn't work your way into it. You didn't force it into being. It appeared, slowly, quietly, almost without asking your permission. Scripture calls this fruit, not effort, not achievement, fruit. In Epistle to the Galatians, it speaks of love, joy, peace, patience, not as things you build, but as something that grows when life is present. And that's the difference you begin to feel. When life is not flowing, everything feels like something you have to keep up. When life begins to flow, something in you no longer needs to be forced. You don't wake up thinking about being better. You don't measure yourself the same way. There is less striving, not because you've given up, but because something deeper is carrying what you used to carry alone. Real life doesn't feel like something you are producing. It feels like something you are learning not to interrupt. And the more you remain there quietly, simply, without trying to turn it into a method, the more you begin to see this was never meant to be heavy. This was never meant to be something you hold together. Life, when it comes from the right place, doesn't need to be pushed. It grows. Conclusion. Maybe the reason it has felt so heavy is not because you failed, not because you didn't try hard enough, but not because something is missing in you, but because, quietly, over time, you began to carry something that was never meant to come from you. You tried to hold it together, to keep it alive, to become what you believed you should be. And maybe now you're just tired. Not of God, but of trying. Jesus never said, try harder and you will live. He said, abide in me. Stay, not perform, not prove, not produce, just remain. And as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. Gospel of John 15:9. Maybe nothing new needs to be added to your life right now. Maybe nothing needs to be fixed all at once. Maybe the only thing is to come back, to stop reaching for what you cannot create, and return to the one who has never stopped giving. And if you don't know how to do that, if it still feels unfamiliar or quiet or even a little empty, that's all right. You don't have to make life happen. You don't have to force anything to grow. Just stay. Stay long enough for what is real to begin to flow again. And may you find in that quiet place that you were never meant to be the source, only the branch held in a life that does not run out.